Hey, it's Drybear. And today I'd like to talk about your feet. More specifically, the things that you put on your feet in Diablo 4, which is your boots and the inherent property that comes with them, which is a modifier for your evade ability in combat. There are currently 3 different inherent properties on boots that all have different benefits and situations where they can be powerful, and I've been asked many times, which one is best? Do I want multiple evades? Do I want to reset my evade cooldown when dealing damage? Or do I want movement speed after I evade? So today I'm going to talk about that. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me in the community, the next time you put shoes and socks on, one of your socks is going to be twisted slightly, which is going to be a very small amount of pressure on one foot that's different than the other foot. All right, let's talk about boots. Again, the 3 different properties that you'll have are above the fold, I like to call it, on boots here, which means you have your rolled stats that exist on the boot item, and then above that, it's going to give you an inherent property to the boots. And which ones you get that drop will have different effects. One of them is you can get 1 or 2 max evade charges. If you get higher level of these, you can get multiple charges of evade. You can also get attacks reduce evade's cooldown, and this can upgrade as well, which means that when you deal damage, it lowers the cooldown on evade. And then you can also get max movement speed when you evade for 1 second. So the question is, which one of these is best? And should it matter? Does it matter? Does it make your build better? And I would argue that it matters a lot for your survivability, especially as you push higher levels of Nightmare. How you manage your evade is going to matter. And keep in mind that your cooldown reduction does apply to your evade skill as well. And so that consideration should be applied to this too, because your cooldown reduction may not be as necessary if you have attacks reduce evade's cooldown, but if you have multiple charges or a single evade, the cooldown is going to have a much bigger impact on your evade and how you use it. So your evade is this ability here. It's your ability to dash in combat, and it has by default, I think, a 6 or 5 second cooldown without any cooldown reduction on it. When you get any one of these powers, it will modify it. This one will give multiple charges. So you can see that when I have these boots equipped, I have 3 different dashes that I can use in succession. This is useful for going around corners, or if you have a build that needs constant repositioning. If you need to collect deployables that are on the ground, you need to reposition for traps on rogue, or you need to get to a specific spot so you can trigger an effect. I like having multiple charges for that because then you can just move around while you're in combat and allows you to cast and do things like that. The attacks reduce evade's cooldown is one that I think doesn't get enough love. Builds that hit frequently can take major advantage of attacks reduce evade's cooldown. You can actually have almost infinite evades if you hit frequently enough. So if you have a build that is using a one-hander or has lots of spam attacks, like the ball lightning build or bone spear, all of these that hit constantly can actually very easily reduce your evade. The big thing you'll know about this though is you'll want to evade and then let the attacks hit, and then it will reset. You'll get to evade again, and you'll get to evade again as you keep hitting and hitting. So if you go into combat by dashing, you may need to use the abilities right away, but actually I think that this is probably one of the best ones to have, depending on the build that you're running. And lastly, you have evade grants movement speed for 1 second. I have found this one to be probably the weakest of the 3. So you can evade, and you get this nice big burst of speed, and then it resets, and then you can have this as well. I think this one benefits the most from having high amounts of cooldown reduction. So if you have cooldowns reset in your build already, or you have lots of cooldown reduction on your helm, your amulet, or your offhand, if you're running a build that has an offhand, this one actually becomes pretty cool because you can actually use this for some serious repositioning. I've also found that with this, if you're looking for a build that uses lots of dense, like you need the mobs to cluster up, what I'll use this one for is you can run into a room, grab all the mob aggro, dash, and then sprint away down behind collision or something. The mobs will come and gather up in a doorway, or they'll gather up on a corner, and then you can burn them down, which is a lot harder to do if you have just a single dash or attacks reset. You won't be able to cover as much distance as quickly, which is pretty nice. Or play a class that has lots of mobility that can do that on their own. So to answer the question, which one is best? I would argue that the most usable of all these is going to be max evade charges. This one applies to all builds pretty unilaterally, which is cool. It gives you a lot of options for this. And as you upgrade it, it gives you more and more dashes. And especially with this being at max upgrade, you'll notice the difference when you have it versus when you don't. I would only use the movement speed after evade if you have a build that can maximize the benefit of having it in general. Some builds have modifiers for movement speed. You also may be able to use it for positioning, and it's also good for speed clearing, where you're not going to be killing everything. I've noticed that this one is a lot better. So even if we did a test here where we did 3 dashes in a row, we could do 1, 2, and then 3, or we can put on the movement speed and we do 1 and then see how far this covers. For a single dash, especially with high amounts of cooldown reduction, this can help you a lot with farming content that is easier than what you're looking for. So maybe you want a pair of boots that has evade grants movement speed fully upgraded, that gives you a nice burst of movement speed with high cooldown reduction. And then when you're running low nightmare and you're just farming legendary powers, you're not trying to push, you're not trying to get high item power items or see how far your character can go. This one is excellent for high movement speed, but it's less valuable, I would argue, in a combat situation where you're facing enemies that are stronger than you or exceptionally dangerous, because the movement speed is going to matter less than being able to dash multiple times, especially if you're up against, so for example, the max evade charges or attacks reduce cooldown. If you're in a situation where there's a lot of CC coming out over and over and over, it's nice to be able to break that with a dash, and having multiple dashes makes that a lot more convenient than the movement speed here. But the reason I wanted to make this video was to cover this topic and let people know this actually makes a huge difference in your build, which one you decide to run. And when you get boots that are yellow that drop, you not only want to look at the stats that are on it to make sure it matches the build that you have, but also on the passive roll for which evade modifier exists on the boots and what ones run best for what builds. Let me know down below what your favorite is, what you run with, or any wisdoms you've picked up, because I think there's a lot of really cool niche scenarios that come from each one of these. And I actually hope that they add more to the boots in the future. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.